On March 20th, 2022, what seemed like an ordinary morning in the mountains of northern Italy became the beginning of one of the most shocking cases of the decade. A horrifying discovery beneath the Alps sent shockwaves throughout the entire nation. But what haunts people isn't just the crime itself, but how it was concealed with such calculated coldness. Join Crime Documentary Files as we explore today's case. Carol Maltesi was born in 1995 in the small town of Sesto Calende, a peaceful place by Lake Maggiore in northern Italy. She came from a mixed Italian-Dutch family. Her mother, Giuseppina, was Italian, while her father, Fabio, held Dutch citizenship. When Carol was very young, her parents divorced. Fabio returned to the Netherlands, leaving Giuseppina to raise their daughter alone amid numerous hardships. Giuseppina had to work multiple jobs simultaneously, sometimes very far from home, just to ensure her daughter had everything she needed. Despite growing up without a father and with a frequently absent mother, Carol never held any resentment. Instead, she understood and always knew that her mother was doing everything she possibly could. From an early age, Carol was a vibrant child, always captivating those around her with her energy. She loved dancing, horseback riding, and often dreamed of adventures around the world. She learned languages with astonishing speed. By age 8, she could communicate in several foreign languages. But what Carol was most passionate about was books. She could sit for hours reading without tiring, immersing herself in every page as if stepping into another world. Perhaps this became her temporary escape from the emptiness and struggles of an incomplete family life. In 2015, at age 20, Carol entered technical college with great hope. Life seemed to be opening up endless possibilities before her. But fate had completely different plans. Carol fell in love, and then she became pregnant. This news struck like lightning from a clear sky. She was only 20 years old, still sitting in lecture halls with so many dreams yet to be reached. But after sleepless nights of contemplation, Carol made her decision. She would have the baby. In the innocence of youth, she believed she could perfectly balance motherhood with pursuing her unfinished dreams. Life taught her a bitter lesson. When the baby was born in 2016, Carol truly understood the meaning of the burden of responsibility. Difficulties came like a storm, from staying up nights caring for the child to daily worries about money. Her boyfriend, now the father of the child, was also struggling with tight financial circumstances. But they didn't give up. Love and determination drove them both to overcome every challenge. They cherished the dream of building a real family, where love could triumph over everything. Hoping to find a better start, they moved to Verona, a larger city where job opportunities seemed slightly more abundant. And for a brief period, everything truly seemed to be improving. Carol found part-time work at a shoe store as a sales consultant. Life was still struggling, money wasn't abundant, but they were working hard every day. At that time, Carol was no different from millions of young women worldwide, a young mother juggling work, children, and her own dreams. She wasn't famous, had nothing special about her. Yet in life, sometimes the biggest turning points begin with seemingly small choices. In 2019, an unexpected event occurred. Carol had fallen for another man, and for months, she lived in a double world, family on one side, a secret affair on the other, until all secrets were exposed. The truth about the secret affair eventually couldn't be hidden. When her current boyfriend, the father of her child, discovered the betrayal, he felt like being stabbed in the heart. The 3-year relationship ended in pain and bitterness, but for Carol, this felt like the liberation she'd been waiting for. Her heart had already turned elsewhere, and now she could finally freely pursue her new love. The man she was infatuated with was still living with his parents, and they needed time to build a future together. The decision to leave her son with his father wasn't easy. It was perhaps the most painful moment in Carol's life, looking at her child and knowing she had to temporarily leave to create a better life for both of them. She comforted herself that this was only a temporary sacrifice, that someday, when everything was stable, she would reunite with her son. but life seemed to never stop testing her. While struggling with emotional turmoil, Carol also had to witness her mother gradually losing memory and health due to a degenerative neurological disease. Each visit, she saw her mother getting weaker, more distant. Carol tried to spend every free moment with her mother, but then February 2020 arrived, bringing an unforeseeable catastrophe. COVID-19 swept across Europe like a storm, and Italy, Carol's homeland, was particularly severely affected by this pandemic. Italians, including Carol, quickly fell into an unprecedented crisis. Strict lockdown orders made all normal activities impossible. Completely isolated, Carol faced increasingly crushing financial pressure. She couldn't even afford to send support money to her son, something that tormented her endlessly. In these suffocating circumstances, Carol was forced to seek a new way to make a living. Initially, she tried creating a YouTube channel, sharing survival experiences during lockdown days, from saving money, overcoming loneliness, to random thoughts about life confined within four walls. Carol hoped to earn money from advertising, but reality quickly showed her this path was too long with too little profit, completely insufficient to cover urgent living expenses. And then, her attention gradually turned to an emerging platform: OnlyFans. Under the alias Charlotte Angie, Carol began experimenting with sensitive photo and video content. The first cautious steps brought her considerable money. Enough to live, enough to hope. Encouraged, she continued this work, gradually expanding content boundaries, bolder, more daring, in exchange for attention and more stable income. However, this industry also had its dark side. When people learned about Carol's new profession, many friends and acquaintances cut off contact with her. At this point, Carol felt hurt and angry. She couldn't understand this hypocrisy. You can watch but despise the person creating the content? She wondered during lonely nights. To Carol, this was nothing but outdated prejudice, barriers that Italian society still embraced while the world had moved far beyond. She defended her views strongly on social media. "This is art," she wrote. "This is women's freedom to choose their own lives." Carol truly believed she was leading a revolution in thinking that what she was doing would be widely accepted in the future. And this confidence seemed proven through her success. The Charlotte Angie account attracted more and more followers. Numbers grew steadily each day, bringing with them stable income, something Carol had long craved. Then collaboration offers began arriving. Initially just professional photo shoots, but gradually adult film producers also noticed her. They made attractive offers, not just financially, but also opportunities to work in a real industry. Carol embraced these opportunities with youthful enthusiasm. She saw this as a natural progression in her new career. What began as a temporary solution to financial crisis had now become a promising career path. In interviews, Carol always emphasized that she had no plans to dedicate her entire life to this. She shared certain projects for the future, but currently she was enjoying what she was doing and diligently saving money to turn dreams into reality. Alongside her rising career, Carol began feeling the burden of social pressure. She couldn't remain silent about the constant judgment and condemnation she had to endure. On her personal social media pages, angry posts began appearing with increasing frequency. Psychological pressure and relentless moral condemnation forced her to speak up in self-defense. Carol firmly defended women's right to freely choose their field of work, considering this a fundamental right that everyone must respect. Although she understood her work wasn't widely accepted by society, Carol still felt unfairly humiliated. She couldn't understand why personal choice should subject her to such negative judgment. But public condemnation was only part of the problem. The bigger challenge came from the person she loved. Her new boyfriend, someone she had hoped to build a future with, increasingly showed negative attitudes toward her profession. Tension in the relationship escalated daily. Arguments became more frequent and intense. Finally, when they couldn't find common ground, the couple decided to break up. At 25, Carol once again found herself facing familiar crossroads in life. This time she decided to completely change her environment, moving to the small town of Rescaldina, a quiet suburb of Milan. Perhaps this was an opportunity to start over. Here, Carol was determined to break from her controversial past and seek a more normal life. She quickly found work at a local perfume shop. However, after only a short time at the new job, Carol realized that income from selling perfume couldn't compare to what she was accustomed to. The allure of making money quickly and abundantly ultimately won. Carol quit her job at the perfume shop and returned to her old profession. Charlotte Angie once again appeared on social media platforms as if the recent break was just a fleeting dream. And it was in Rescaldina that fate brought her to meet Davide Fontana, 42, a successful banker and a fairly familiar face in the local community. Davide Fontana embodied success by social standards. At 42, he possessed everything a middle-aged man could dream of: a solid career at the bank, respectable reputation in the community, and the image of a courteous, educated man. On social media, Davide was a beloved food blogger. He meticulously shared knowledge about haute cuisine history, posting beautiful images of refined dishes he prepared himself. Followers often commented praising his creativity and culinary passion. Additionally, Davide presented himself as someone knowledgeable about technology and photography. However, his photography interests didn't stop at natural landscapes or ordinary portraits. Behind the artistic photos posted publicly, he harbored a completely different passion: sensitive, bold photo shoots. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the polished exterior of a successful man, Davide concealed dark desires that even his closest associates never knew about. Regarding family, Davide had been married for many years and seemingly had a stable, happy marriage. His wife trusted and loved her husband, never suspecting that the man she lived with daily had a completely different side. But the internet opened up a new world for Davide, where he could satisfy secret desires he couldn't share with anyone in real life. He began seeking young, attractive women willing to participate in special photo shoots, sessions he called art, but were actually to satisfy dark tendencies in his soul. And during this hunt for such subjects, in November 2020, he met Carol. From their first meeting, Davide was intensely attracted to Carol. Something about this young woman made him unable to look away. From a simple business relationship, feelings between them quickly developed in a more complex direction. Davide proposed a simple arrangement: money in exchange for intimacy. For Carol, this was just another business transaction. She needed money, and he was willing to pay. For Davide, this was an opportunity to satisfy desires he couldn't share with his wife. Initially, boundaries between them were very clear. Carol provided services, Davide paid. Gradually, what began as a cold business arrangement transformed into something deeper, at least for Davide. He began realizing he had fallen for this young woman. Not just physical desire, but a type of feeling he thought he no longer had the capacity to experience. Carol didn't just satisfy his secret needs, she also brought him a sense of youth and vitality that his marriage of many years couldn't provide. By March 2021, Davide decided to confess his secret affair to his wife and demand a divorce. But even when confessing, Davide wasn't completely honest. He told his wife the other woman's name was Deborah, not Carol. Perhaps he feared his wife would find Carol and create unwanted trouble. After the divorce, Davide and Carol officially lived together. Their relationship became more intimate, but also more complex. He helped Carol develop her career on social media platforms. From professional photography to video production, Davide took on a management role and received a portion of profits from her income. This was no longer a simple relationship between customer and service provider, but a business partnership with complex emotional ties. But like all relationships built on unstable foundations, the first cracks began to appear. Carol's career under the name Charlotte Angie continued to flourish. Collaboration offers began pouring in, bringing attractive business opportunities and impressive income levels. Davide witnessed Carol's development with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was proud of her success. On the other, he had to accept the reality that Carol's work required her to have sex with other men, participate in public performances, and even traveled to complete film projects. Surprisingly, Davide seemed completely unfazed by the nature of this work. He understood this was Carol's profession, and what she did on film sets had nothing to do with their personal relationship. But David's tolerance had clear boundaries. While he could accept Carol working with other men in professional contexts, he became extremely jealous when anyone tried to approach her in personal life. This became clear when Carol's ex-boyfriend, the father of her child, suddenly reappeared. He had actively contacted Carol, expressing regret about past events and suggesting the possibility of reconciliation. As soon as David learned this news, a completely different side of him emerged. Jealousy awakened like a beast, causing him to lose composure and reason. He couldn't accept the possibility that Carol would return to a younger man who shared a child with her. Although Carol had flatly refused her ex-boyfriend's proposal, Davide couldn't calm down. He began constantly calling the man, escalating from gentle warnings to direct and vicious threats. But this still wasn't enough to satisfy his jealousy. In the following weeks, the ex-boyfriend's car tires were mysteriously punctured twice. Although there was no direct evidence proving Davide was the culprit, his previous threats made him the prime suspect. Meanwhile, Carol's social media fame was rapidly growing. She now had over 30,000 followers across her platforms. Carol traveled extensively, creating content in the Czech Republic and the Netherlands. Besides major projects, Carol also received countless individual orders from private clients. They sent detailed scripts through private messages, willing to pay significant amounts for Carol to realize their personal fantasies. This was the most stable and profitable part of her work. But amid these brilliant successes, Carol's love life was undergoing an important transformation. In fall 2021, she met Salvatore Golda, a colleague in the adult film industry. Unlike the complex and calculating relationship with Davide, feelings between Carol and Salvatore developed naturally and genuinely. Salvatore not only understood Carol's work, but also respected her as a person. He didn't try to control or change her, but accepted and loved her exactly as she was. This relationship quickly became serious, and soon after, Salvatore gave Carol an engagement ring. Salvatore's proposal was like a light at the end of the tunnel for Carol. She realized this was her chance to start a new life, a life with a man who truly loved and respected her. Carol accepted the proposal with joy and hope she hadn't felt in years. But this decision also posed a difficult challenge: how to break free from Davide. Life with the banker had become an unbearable burden. Carol longed for freedom, true love, and to live the life she wanted. But breaking up with Davide wasn't simple. He wasn't just a lover, but also a business partner. He remained involved in all her activities, from photography to video production, and received a portion of profits from everything they created. This financial entanglement made separation complex and risky. Carol's business was thriving, bringing her considerable income. She had earned enough not only to cover living expenses, but could even afford to stop working and enjoy what she had achieved. With promising plans, Carol decided to return to Verona to be closer to her son, hoping to re-establish the mother-child relationship that had been interrupted for so long. She continued participating in live performances at private parties and special events in the adult industry. However, in early 2022, an unexpected change occurred. Carol disappeared from the radar. All her activities suddenly stopped. She only occasionally responded to messages from friends and family, and her social media posts became unusually rare. Loved ones began worrying. Time passed like this for 2 months. No one heard Carol's voice over the phone. She didn't answer calls, and to all concerned questions, she only replied with vague reasons: that she was busy with household work, looking for housing in Verona, and building a relationship with her son. Later, Carol announced she would be vacationing in Dubai. Carol's close friends, worried and anxious, tried to contact Davide. However, he simply admitted their relationship had ended, and he didn't know where to find Carol. His vague explanation made the situation even more suspicious, and soon after, the reason for Carol's disappearance began to unfold. The story of what really happened to Carol became one of the most cruel and calculated crimes in modern Italian history. On January 8, 2022, Carol had her final club performance. 3 days later, on January 11th, she was asked to film a video commissioned by David. However, subsequent investigation revealed that this commission didn't come from an ordinary client, but from a fake account created by Davide himself. In the commission, he detailed the pornographic video content Carol had to film. The client's requested scenario was extremely brutal and abnormal. It included binding the victim, gagging her with tape, covering her head with a plastic bag, followed by savage beatings and specifically using a hammer to attack her head. Particularly, the script required obtaining the victim's phone password during the process. This was presented as part of an absolute domination scenario, demonstrating complete power of the attacker over the victim. To Carol, this seemed like just a strange but not overly dangerous request in an acting context. She agreed to participate without realizing she was giving the killer the key to access her entire digital life. Before starting, they thoroughly discussed safety measures. David promised to only pretend to perform violent actions without causing real harm. Carol would convincingly act out pain responses to create the effect the client wanted. But as soon as the camera started rolling, something in Davide's mind changed. Perhaps it was excitement from the feeling of absolute power, or perhaps this was his true nature, a sadist who had been waiting for the opportunity to reveal violent instincts. Instead of acting as agreed, David began using real force with all his strength. Every blow was real, every action was brutal, and Carol, bound and gagged, couldn't cry for help or resist. This wasn't an accident or sudden rage. Evidence later showed that the entire client scenario was actually created by Davide himself from a fake account. He had meticulously planned every detail. As soon as Carol, in pain and fear, revealed her phone password, Davide began using the hammer as a real weapon instead of just a prop. In the first days after Carol's death, he couldn't leave the scene, constantly returning to where Carol's body lay motionless. He sat there for hours, staring at what remained of the woman he had once claimed to love. But eventually, reality forced David to act. He needed to dispose of the body, and this required careful preparation. In the following days, he went to different tool stores, buying items one by one to avoid suspicion. Hand saws, large scissors, electric saws, and spare blades. Everything needed for the gruesome work ahead. Most notably, he ordered a large freezer and a meat grinder, not with his own money, but using Carol's phone. This was the first sign of the long-term plan he was harboring. This grinder, as investigators later discovered, was used to burn some parts of Carol's body, creating the severe burns forensic experts found on the remains. While preparing to dispose of the body, Davide also had to deal with the outside world. On January 14th, Carol had planned to go to Paris with Salvatore. When Salvatore called to check, Davide responded with terrifying calmness that Carol had contracted COVID-19 and was self-isolating at home. This lie was completely plausible in the pandemic context. Salvatore, though worried, trusted, and didn't insist on meeting her. He even felt responsible for keeping distance to avoid infection. In the following weeks, Salvatore repeatedly tried to contact Carol directly, but all efforts were blocked by Davide. He always had reasonable excuses. Carol was too weak to talk, she needed rest, or she was sleeping. All these explanations were presented so convincingly by Davide that Salvatore couldn't suspect anything. In the next 3 months, Davide performed one of the most haunting acts in modern criminal history. He meticulously dismembered Carol's body and preserved each piece in the freezer while maintaining a perfect virtual life for her on social media. Every morning, Davide would check Carol's phone. Dozens of messages from friends, family, colleagues. He would reply to each message in Carol's characteristic manner, using words and expressions he had learned after months of living with her. He updated Carol's Instagram with old photos from her gallery, sometimes adding sweet captions about daily life. He chatted with friends on WhatsApp, sharing thoughts and future plans. He even used Carol's credit card for online shopping and bill payments, creating a perfect financial trail showing she was still living normally. According to what Davide later confessed, Carol's phone almost never stopped ringing. Every day someone would call or text. But Davide, methodically and coldly, personally updated Carol's social media pages, posting old photos from her gallery, creating a false image of a peaceful life. Until the morning of March 20th, 2022, during a peaceful morning in the small village of Borno, Brescia province, an elderly man was walking along the winding roads of the Alps. When he happened to notice something strange from the high cliff, he suddenly stopped. At the foot of the mountain, 4 large black bags lay scattered. At first, he thought it might just be carelessly discarded trash, but when he approached and climbed down to investigate, what he discovered made him immediately call police with trembling hands. Inside those bags wasn't waste, but the body of a woman, systematically and brutally cut into 18 pieces. Police immediately realized this wasn't an ordinary murder. The victim's body showed signs of severe trauma. Head, shoulders, wrists, and eyes were bruised and swollen, as if she had endured a savage attack. Cuts and wounds across her body were signs of prolonged torture. Skin was severely bruised, with uneven areas where the outer layer had been removed. The scene became even more horrifying when officers examined the victim's mouth and discovered several teeth were missing. But this wasn't from impact. Entire tooth roots were gone, as if they had been brutally extracted. Forensic experts immediately recognized that whoever performed this dismemberment must have had experience, possibly a hunter, butcher, or someone with professional anatomical knowledge. The cuts were very precise and professional, showing the killer knew exactly what they were doing. Through autopsy examination, forensic doctors determined the body had been preserved in a freezer for an extended period before being thrown from the cliff. At this point, police still didn't know who the victim was. No missing person reports matched. To get closer to solving the crime, they needed to identify the victim and find evidence. But the body had been mutilated to the point where even determining gender required additional analysis. A thorough laboratory examination was conducted, and while awaiting results, police decided to hold a press conference to warn local residents. Soon after, they realized the remains belonged to a young woman, about 5 feet 1 inch tall with black hair. Her fingernails were painted purple, and she had a total of 11 tattoos on her body. However, notably, most of these tattoos had been deliberately damaged by the killer. Clearly, the perpetrator wanted to hide all traces that could help identify the victim, thus complicating the investigation. These tattoos later became an important clue. Although authorities still didn't know the victim's name, they informed the public this was a woman, and police released descriptions of some remaining tattoos, hoping someone would recognize their owner. However, all efforts met with silence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected person, Andrea Tortelli, 43, director of the local online newspaper BzNews.it. On Saturday morning, March 26th, like many other journalists, he was following the second mysterious case in recent months that had drawn attention to the Brescia Mountains. Tortelli wasn't an ordinary journalist. He had started writing his first article at 17 for a local publication and had collaborated with many newspapers, publishers, and press offices. But what made Tortelli special was his never-fading passion for true journalism, the kind that verifies every piece of news, asks questions, and seeks answers. In just a few hours, with only a computer and smartphone, Andrea accomplished what the entire police force hadn't been able to, not only identifying the victim, but also directly communicating with the killer. Tortelli started with a logical theory. First, the perpetrator couldn't have wanted to transport the body to such a remote provincial area. Most likely, he lived relatively close to where the body was found. Second, he believed the killer was familiar with his victim, meaning she too must have lived nearby. These were just assumptions, but from these deductions, Tortelli began his investigation. A crucial question emerged in the reporter's mind. Why were there no missing person reports matching this woman's description? After all, more than a month had passed since her death. How could her relatives not notice her absence and not search for her? Meanwhile, he began scouring forums and social media to find traces close to this woman. From Carol's professional world, Tortelli gathered important information, first her ID data, which matched the description from the body found in Borno. Then, he discovered her cell phone number. The breakthrough came on March 26, 2022, when a witness contacted police, recognizing the woman in the case thanks to tattoos he had seen when Carol gave an interview under the alias Charlotte. By comparing images and tattoos, police confirmed the victim was Carol, an adult film actress who managed her own social media pages. Revealing her alias, police continued investigating, and Tortelli continued digging into Carol's life, discovering she had worked with 2 agencies simultaneously. At the first film company, they said Carol hadn't worked with them for a long time and hadn't answered phone calls or messages, so they thought she had left the industry. They had no new information. At the second film company, Tortelli met another actress in the industry who claimed to be Carol's friend. She provided him with Charlotte's phone number. Based on this information, Tortelli finally identified the victim's real name, Carol Maltesi. Tortelli repeatedly called, but no one answered. He decided to text through an app, and surprisingly, someone responded claiming to be Carol. Under the guise of interviewing about life in the industry, he tried to arrange a meeting but received a rude refusal. Tortelli realized it wasn't Carol, but the killer who was responding. He persisted in continuing the dialogue, persuading this person to record a voice message or talk by phone. After another refusal, Tortelli changed tactics. He reported discovering a woman's body with tattoos identical to Carol's, saying he wanted to ensure the actress was still alive. Information about the body terrified the perpetrator, as he didn't expect the body to be discovered and identified so quickly. Fortunately, he was wrong. The journalist continued the conversation, insisting on at least a 3-second call. But then, the conversation partner suddenly disappeared, not responding or reading messages anymore. Tortelli believed he had just communicated with Carol's killer. He faced 2 choices: publish the information in his magazine, attracting attention and fame, or report to police for their own verification, though information might leak. He also realized his intervention could end badly, as the killer might flee or do something extreme like suicide. However, Tortelli decided to do the right thing and turn the information over to police. On March 27th, he went to the police station and handed over the information to officers, only then writing an article. But he didn't reveal all details, didn't name the victim's real name, and didn't mention the conversation with the killer. Nevertheless, the article still created a huge impact. After reading the article, the killer began worrying and monitoring news. He realized the investigation was progressing and getting close to him. In panic, he decided to report Carol's disappearance to police to deflect suspicion from himself. On the day the article was published, David Fontana and Salvatore, Carol's fiancé, went to the police station to report the disappearance. They were immediately interrogated until 4 a.m. the next morning. On March 28th, mainstream media officially confirmed the victim's identity through DNA testing. It was Carol Maltesi. On the morning of March 29th, Davide Fontana was arrested on suspicion of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. His testimony from the beginning was filled with anxiety and confusion. In the interrogation room on the night of March 29th, Davide tried to maintain an innocent image, insisting he hadn't seen Carol in 2 years and didn't understand why he was suspected. However, investigators had clear evidence. They knew Davide had contacted Carol and tried to hide his true identity when speaking with the journalist. Under pressure, Davide finally confessed his crime. He stated that on January 11, 2022, he and Carol had filmed a special video requested by a client who paid a large sum. This video included tying Carol up, gagging her, beating her, and using a hammer to strike her head. Initially, both were just pretending, but when the camera started rolling, Davide couldn't control himself. He continued hitting Carol with the hammer until she was dying. When Carol was still breathing, he used a knife to cut her throat. Davide justified this action as ending her suffering. However, investigators didn't believe this mercy explanation. Evidence showed the plan to kill Carol had been made beforehand, and the extreme video commission was from a fake account created by David himself. The truth was, David had planned to kill Carol long ago because she wanted to leave the adult industry, return to Verona to live with her son, and marry Salvatore, meaning he would lose both his lover and income source from managing her career. Davide couldn't accept losing Carol. If he couldn't have her, then no one else would either. Killing Carol was just the beginning of the nightmare. In the days following her death, David couldn't leave the scene. He constantly returned, staring at the body, even taking photos, the behavior of a sadist finding sick pleasure in the victim's death. Then he went to buy necessary tools: power saws, large scissors, meat knives, all purchased with cash at different stores to avoid detection. He also ordered a freezer and a meat grinder using Carol's phone. The dismemberment process lasted many days. Davide cut Carol's body into 18 pieces systematically and professionally. Some body parts were burned in the grinder, explaining the severe burns forensic experts discovered. After murdering Carol, Davide lived a terrifying double life. By day, he was a banker, a beloved food blogger. By night, he returned home to Carol's body in the freezer, continuing to fake her life on social media. This was why no one reported Carol missing. To the outside world, she was still living normally. Only Davide knew the horrific truth. However, the plan's perfection was also its weakness. When Andrea Tortelli contacted Carol's phone number and mentioned finding a body with identical tattoos, Davide panicked. He didn't know the body had been discovered, and in his panic, he stopped responding to messages. This action made Tortelli certain he was talking to the killer. When the story was published, all of Italy was stunned. Not just because of the crime's brutality, but because of how someone could maintain such perfect deception in the social media age. The official trial began on November 24th, 2022. Davide's lawyers argued the killing was accidental. He got too carried away implementing the script and accidentally killed Carol. However, prosecutors had clear evidence this was premeditated murder, from the fake account commissioning the video to obtaining Carol's phone password to maintaining the deception for 3 months. Psychological experts confirmed Davide was completely sane and fully understood his actions. He wasn't a victim of mental illness, but a calculating killer. Throughout the trial, Davide appeared cold, showing no remorse or apology to Carol's family. He only continued justifying and blaming circumstances. On June 12, 2023, the verdict was announced. Although prosecutors requested life imprisonment, the judge decided Davide's actions weren't entirely premeditated, and dismembering the body wasn't considered an aggravating factor. Davide was sentenced to only 30 years in prison and ordered to pay $195,000 in compensation to Carol's son, $108,000 to her parents, and $21,600 to the child's father. This verdict caused outrage throughout Italy, as Carol's family couldn't believe the man who brutally killed their daughter would only serve 30 years in prison. Do you think this was an appropriate sentence for a sadist like Davide? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.